Late at night, the streets were almost empty, and the city lights glowed softly against the dark sky. Vin Diesel drove quietly in his black SUV, his face hidden under a cap. He wasn't going to a movie set or a fancy party. Tonight was different. He wanted to see what really happened inside his restaurant. Fast Flame Grill when nobody knew he was coming. He had opened the restaurant 2 years ago, wanting it to be a place where people could enjoy food, music, and good vibes. The staff always greeted him with big smiles whenever he visited. But deep inside, Vin wondered if those smiles were real. He knew fame had a way of changing how people acted. So tonight he decided to visit without warning anyone. No cameras, no bodyguards, just him and the truth. He parked his car behind the restaurant where no one could see him. The night air was cool, and the faint smell of grilled meat drifted from the kitchen vents. He could hear the muffled sounds of laughter, clattering dishes and sizzling pans. Everything seemed normal, yet something in his gut told him that not everything was as perfect as it looked. Vin put on a black hoodie and walked toward the back door. His boots made almost no sound on the pavement. He didn't want to be recognized, he wanted to blend in, to see the place through the eyes of an ordinary person. He took a deep breath before entering inside the kitchen. The smell of barbecue sauce and roasted vegetables hit him instantly. The chefs were busy flipping burgers, chopping onions, and shouting short orders to each other. The heat was strong, and sweat glistened on their foreheads. No one noticed him slip in. He stood quietly in the corner, observing. He felt proud watching how hard they worked, but also curious. Were they treated fairly? He began walking slowly through the back corridor that led to the storage area. The dim light flickered slightly, creating small shadows on the walls. The air was cooler here, quieter too. He could still hear the laughter from the dining area, but it faded as he moved deeper inside. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't fit. It was soft at first, almost like the wind, but when he stopped walking, he realized it was crying. A woman's voice, quiet and trembling. It came from the storage room at the end of the hall. Vin frowned and stepped closer. His heart started to beat faster. He thought maybe someone was hurt, or something bad had happened. He reached the door and paused. The light inside the room was dim, only a small bulb hanging from the ceiling. He could see through the narrow crack in the door. A woman sat on a crate. Her shoulders shaking, she was wearing a work uniform, the same black and red shirt the servers wore. Her hands covered her face, and her soft sobs echoed in the small room. Vin's first instinct was to step in and ask what was wrong, but he stopped himself. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, listening carefully. Something in her voice sounded familiar, not her tone, but the pain. It reminded him of the nights when he and his mother had struggled. Before fame, before success, before everything, he could see the woman's name tag shining faintly under the light. Tasha. He remembered her now. Always smiling, always full of energy when he came by. He had even told his manager once that she was the kind of worker every business needed. And now seeing her cry alone in the dark made his chest tighten. Vin stood there, his mind racing. Maybe she was just having a bad day. Maybe something personal had happened. But then her words broke the silence, soft and cracked from tears. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to herself. "I work so hard and still can't help my mom. It's like nobody cares." Vin felt something shift inside him. He stayed silent, listening, but every word felt heavier than the last. This wasn't just a bad day. It was pain that had been building for a long time. He didn't move, he didn't breathe too loudly. The sounds of the kitchen felt far away now. It was just him and Tasha's broken voice echoing in that small room. Then she said something that made him freeze completely. "I thought the owner, Vin Diesel, would care about us. But rich people never notice the ones who work for them." Her words cut through him like a knife. He had come to see the truth, and now the truth was staring right at him, and it hurt. He wanted to step in, to tell her he did care, to explain that he had no idea she was struggling. But his legs wouldn't move, his throat tightened, his mind filled with questions. How many other workers felt the same? How many smiles had been fake in front of him? Vin turned his eyes away, guilt crawling into his heart. The night had started as a secret visit to check on his business. But now it felt like something much deeper. He took one slow step back, the floor creaking softly under his boots. He didn't want her to know he was there, not yet. He needed to understand what was really happening first as he left the hallway. The faint sound of her crying followed him like a ghost, and for the first time in years, Vin Diesel, the man known for his strength, felt completely powerless. Vin stood quietly outside the storage room door, his heart heavy with the sound of the woman crying inside. The noise of the kitchen was still in the background, the clatter of pans, the sizzling of meat and the shouting of cooks calling out orders. But here in the dim hallway it felt like another world. The soft, broken sobs of the woman made the air feel cold. He took a slow breath and pushed the door open just a little, enough to see her clearly. The small room smelled of cleaning soap and old cardboard boxes. A single weak bulb hung from the ceiling, throwing long shadows on the walls. The woman sat on a wooden crate, her elbows on her knees, her face buried in her hands. Her curly black hair fell over her shoulders and her whole body shook as she cried. Vin looked at her name tag again. Tasha. He remembered her now. The same waitress who always had a bright smile whenever he visited the restaurant. She would joke with the customers, make kids laugh, and move quickly between tables like she loved her job. But now that same woman was sitting in the dark, crying alone, and it broke something inside him. He took a step forward, then stopped. He didn't want to scare her, not yet. He needed to understand what had happened. Maybe she was hurt. Maybe someone had said something cruel. Or maybe she had a problem bigger than the job itself. He leaned against the wall, listening carefully. Tasha wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her uniform and whispered to herself. Her voice cracked between sobs. I can't do this anymore. I try. But it's never enough. She let out a shaky breath. Mom's medicine costs more every week. I can barely pay rent. And my boss keeps cutting my hours. Vin's chest tightened. He had heard many stories of hard-working people trying to survive, but hearing it in person in his own restaurant made it real. He felt ashamed that he didn't know what his staff went through. He had trusted his managers to treat everyone fairly, but maybe that was a mistake. Then Tasha said something that made Vin freeze in place. I thought Mr. Diesel cared about people like us, but I guess once you're rich, you forget how it feels to struggle. Her words hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken in a movie. He had always believed he was different, a star who remembered where he came from, someone who understood struggle, but now, hearing her voice filled with disappointment, he realized maybe he had grown distant from the real world without meaning to. Tasha looked up for a second, her eyes red and tired. She stared at the floor and whispered, I worked 10 hours straight last week. No break, no overtime. Rick said the system messed up again. But how many times can the system mess up when it's only my pay that's short? Vin's jaw tightened. He knew the name Rick, the night manager. He had always seemed polite and professional when Vin was around. But now suspicion grew inside him. Maybe Rick wasn't the man he pretended to be. Tasha took a deep breath and tried to stop crying. But her voice trembled again. I thought working here would change things. I thought maybe I could help Mom get better. But all I do is come home tired and broke. She laughed bitterly. Maybe dreams are just for people who already have money. Vin's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to walk in right then and tell her she was wrong. That dreams belonged to everyone, but something stopped him. Maybe this moment wasn't about him being a hero. Maybe it was about him opening his eyes. He leaned back against the wall, his thoughts racing. He remembered his own mother working double shifts to raise him. There were nights when she cried quietly, thinking he was asleep. The same sound now echoed in this small room through Tasha's voice. He realized that he had been too focused on expanding his brand, too busy trusting others to manage things, while the people who made his restaurant special were struggling behind closed doors. A few seconds later, one of the chefs shouted from the kitchen, "Order ready for table 5." The sound broke the heavy silence for a moment. Tasha quickly wiped her tears and stood up. She grabbed a towel and tried to compose herself. Her face changed, sadness pushed deep down, replaced by a forced smile. She looked in the cracked mirror on the wall, fixing her hair and whispering to herself, "Come on, girl, you can do this. Don't let them see you weak." Then she opened the door and walked out, her shoulders straight but her eyes still wet. Vin stepped back into the shadow so she wouldn't see him. He watched her walk back into the kitchen, put on her apron, and carry a tray of food like nothing had happened. Her strength amazed him. She was broken inside, but still serving others with a smile. When she disappeared into the dining area, Vin exhaled slowly. He felt anger, guilt, and respect all at once. He now knew he couldn't stay silent. He needed to find out the truth about what was happening in his restaurant. As he turned toward the office, the sound of laughter returned. The world around him looked the same. But for Vin Diesel, everything had changed. He had come for a secret visit, but what he found was a secret pain, one he could no longer ignore. Vin stood in the hallway, his mind spinning with everything he had just heard. Tasha's words kept replaying in his head like an echo he couldn't silence. The woman who worked so hard every day, who smiled at customers and carried heavy trays with tired hands, was crying because she couldn't pay her mother's hospital bills. And worse, she believed her boss, Vin himself, didn't care. He leaned against the cold wall, closing his eyes for a moment. He could almost see his own past in her pain. The nights when his mother worked late cleaning offices, the days when they counted coins to buy dinner. He had promised himself he'd never forget where he came from. Yet somehow, success had built walls between him and the people who worked for him. He opened his eyes and looked toward the kitchen. Everyone there seemed busy, shouting orders, laughing, flipping burgers. The place looked alive and happy on the surface. But now Vin wondered how many others were hiding pain behind those smiles. He needed answers quietly. He walked toward the small office at the back of the restaurant. The door was half open and the light inside was dim. The office smelled like old paper and coffee. On the wall hung a picture of Vin shaking hands with the manager during the restaurant's opening day. It felt strange seeing his own face smiling from that frame while he was standing there in a hoodie, trying not to be seen. He sat down at the desk and pulled the payroll folder from the drawer. He knew where everything was. His business mind had set up every file in the beginning. He flipped through pages filled with names. Hours worked and payments made, at first. Everything looked normal, but then he found Tasha's name. Her hours didn't match the reports he had seen before. Her overtime was missing and the numbers didn't add up. Someone had clearly changed them. Vin frowned and looked deeper. The handwriting on her sheet was different. Someone had erased and rewritten numbers. He kept flipping through pages and noticed the same handwriting on a few other employees' records. All of them worked long hours but received less than they earned. His jaw tightened. The manager, Rick, had signed all the forms. Rick had always been friendly, respectful, and professional whenever Vin visited. But now Vin felt anger boiling inside him. He whispered to himself, how could he do this? His hands trembled slightly as he closed the folder. He wasn't just angry because money was stolen. He was angry because trust was broken. Vin looked around the office and noticed a stack of envelopes in a drawer. They were labeled bonuses, but when he opened them, they were empty. Only one had cash in a small amount, much less than what was missing. Someone was playing a dirty game. He thought about Tasha again, sitting in that storage room crying. Thinking the world had forgotten her, he imagined her working late, skipping meals to send money to her mother, while someone like Rick lived comfortably. Stealing from her hard work, Vin's hands clenched into fists. His breathing grew heavier. He wasn't just a movie star right now, he was a man who had built something meant to help people, and someone had turned it into a trap for them. He stood up and looked at the window. The city lights outside flickered softly, reminding him of the long nights he used to dream about success. But what was success if it came at the cost of others' pain? He took out his phone but stopped himself from calling anyone. He needed to be smart. If he called now, word would spread, and the guilty might cover their tracks. He decided to confront Rick directly, face to face. He opened the office door and looked back toward the kitchen. He could see Rick laughing with a cook near the counter, acting like nothing was wrong. Vin felt his blood boil, but before stepping out, he looked once more at Tasha's record and whispered quietly, "Don't worry, I'll make this right." He walked back into the hallway. Blending into the shadows again, the noise of the restaurant grew louder. Customers chatting, dishes clinking, and music playing from the speakers. Everything looked normal to everyone else. But Vin now saw the cracks beneath the surface. He passed by the storage room again, the same room where Tasha had cried just minutes ago. The light was still on, but she wasn't there anymore. Only the faint sound of her voice echoed in his mind. "Rich people never notice us." Those words burned inside him like fire, and he knew that before the night was over, things were going to change. He took a deep breath and started walking toward Rick, every step slow and heavy. He wasn't Vin Diesel the actor anymore. He was Vin Diesel, the man who had built this place from sweat and passion. Tonight he wasn't going to let anyone hide behind fake smiles or paperwork tricks. He was going to uncover every lie, every theft, every hidden truth in his restaurant. And as he moved closer, he felt something inside him awaken, a quiet rage mixed with a deep sense of justice. For the first time in a long while, Vin wasn't thinking about fame, he was thinking about fairness. He didn't know yet how deep the problem went. But one thing was certain. The night had only just begun, and he was ready to face the truth no matter how dark it was. Vin stood outside the office for a few seconds. Taking a deep breath, his mind was full of anger and disappointment. He had seen enough in the payroll papers to know something was very wrong. The woman crying in the storage room wasn't lying. She was suffering because someone had been cheating her, and the man responsible was probably right there in his kitchen. Smiling like nothing had happened, he walked quietly back through the hallway. Keeping his hoodie low over his face, the smell of roasted meat and spicy barbecue sauce filled the air. But now it didn't feel warm or comforting anymore. It felt fake, like a mask hiding something ugly underneath. He reached the end of the corridor and stood near the kitchen door. From there he could see everything. Cooks flipping burgers, waiters running between tables, and Rick, the manager, standing near the counter with a cup of coffee. Rick looked relaxed, laughing with another worker. Vin watched him closely, his eyes sharp and cold. For a few minutes he said nothing. He wanted to see how Rick behaved when he thought no one was watching. Rick's laugh was loud, but his eyes looked arrogant. He kept giving orders, sometimes snapping at workers if they moved too slowly. Vin noticed the way some employees looked at him, afraid, cautious, like they didn't want to make him angry. That was enough proof for Vin. He waited until Rick turned around, then stepped out of the shadows and walked straight toward him. His heavy boots made a slow, steady sound on the kitchen floor. Rick didn't notice until Vin was right behind him. "Hey, Rick," Vin said calmly, his deep voice cutting through the noise. Rick turned confused, then his eyes went wide. The cup in his hand almost slipped. "Mr. Diesel?" he stammered. "I didn't know you were—" Vin raised a hand to stop him. "Relax," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I just came by to check how things are going." Rick forced a nervous smile. "Everything's great, sir. Business is good. The staff's working hard, no problems at all." Vin nodded slowly, pretending to believe him. "That's good to hear," he said. "Tell me something, though. How's Tasha doing lately?" Rick blinked, caught off guard. He looked away for a moment before replying. "Tasha? Oh, she's fine, I guess, though honestly, she's been a bit lazy these days. Always tired, sometimes emotional. I was actually thinking about letting her go." Vin's eyes darkened. His calm face didn't change, but his anger grew stronger inside. "You think she's lazy?" he asked quietly. Rick shrugged. "Yeah. She's not like before. I think she's getting burned out. Happens all the time." Vin's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "Burned out because you've been cutting her hours and stealing her overtime pay?" Rick froze, his mouth hanging open. The kitchen suddenly felt silent, only the sound of oil sizzling in the fryer filled the air. I don't know what you mean, sir," Rick said quickly, sweat forming on his forehead. "There must be some mistake." Vin took a step closer, towering over him. His voice was steady but powerful. "Don't lie to me, I checked the records myself." He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out the payroll sheet he had taken earlier. "Your handwriting's all over it." Rick's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Vin leaned in closer, his deep voice sharp like a knife. "You think people like Tasha won't notice when you take what's theirs? You think I won't notice?" Rick swallowed hard. "Sir, please, I can explain." Vin interrupted him. "You don't need to explain. You just need to get out." Rick blinked in shock. "You're firing me?" Vin's eyes didn't move. "I'm giving you what you gave her, no warning." "No mercy," Rick tried to defend himself. "But I only—" Vin pointed toward the exit, his jaw tight. "Go," he said, "before I make sure everyone here knows what you've done." For a moment, Rick stood frozen, then realizing there was no way out. He dropped his cup on the counter and walked toward the back door. His shoulders slumped, the kitchen staff watching quietly. Some looked confused, others seemed relieved. Vin didn't speak again until Rick was gone. He looked around at the faces staring at him. "If anyone here feels cheated or mistreated, you come to me directly," he said, his voice calm but serious. This place was built on respect, not fear. The workers nodded slowly. Some smiled weakly, others looked shocked. No one had ever seen him like that before. Vin turned and walked back toward the office. His heart was still heavy. He had done what was right, but something about it didn't feel complete. Firing Rick wouldn't fix Tasha's pain. It wouldn't erase the night she cried thinking no one cared. He sat down at the desk again, looking at the payroll folder. The papers were still scattered, the proof of betrayal right in front of him. But behind that proof was a bigger truth. He had trusted the wrong people. Vin ran his hand through his hair and whispered to himself, "This ends tonight." He wasn't just going to fix one mistake, he was going to rebuild everything. To make sure no one in his restaurant ever felt invisible again. As he closed the office door, he could hear the faint sounds of the restaurant returning to normal. But inside him nothing was normal anymore. Tonight had changed everything, and the man who had walked in quietly would not leave the same way. The restaurant was quieter now, but Vin's anger still burned inside him like fire. He had thrown Rick out, yet his heart wasn't calm. He needed to understand how deep the damage went. He needed to make sure no one else was suffering because of Rick's lies. Vin stood near the kitchen doorway, his hood now lowered, revealing his face fully under the bright lights. The moment the staff saw him clearly, silence spread through the kitchen like a wave. Some of them froze, spoons and spatulas hanging midair. Others stared with wide eyes, whispering softly to each other. Vin Diesel, the owner, and the movie star, was standing right there among them. His expression was serious, his jaw tight. He looked around slowly before speaking. "Everyone, keep working," he said in a calm voice. "But I need to have a quick word with the manager." Rick, who had been standing near the counter pretending to fix something, looked up sharply. He forced a smile, trying to act normal. "Of course. Sir," he said quickly, "what can I do for you?" Vin took a step closer, his powerful frame making Rick shrink a little. "You can start," Vin said quietly, "by telling me the truth." Rick blinked, pretending to be confused. "Truth about what, sir?" Vin leaned slightly closer, his deep voice low but firm. "About why Tasha's pay has been changed, why her overtime hours are missing, and why your signature is all over her file." The color drained from Rick's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Vin's stare stopped him cold. The staff around them slowed their movements, pretending to keep working but clearly listening. Rick's voice trembled. I can explain. It was just a mix-up with the system, sir. You know how payroll errors happen sometimes." Vin didn't blink. "How many times did this mix-up happen?" he asked. "Because I checked other files too, and it seems like the system only makes mistakes for the hardest working people. Isn't that strange?" Rick's lips moved, but no sound came out. Sweat glistened on his forehead. The tension in the room grew heavy. Even the sizzling pan seemed to quiet down. Vin finally spoke again, his tone colder now. "You've been stealing from my employees, Rick. You've been taking what's theirs and calling it a mistake." Rick's voice broke. "Please, sir, I didn't mean to. I needed the money, my rent. Vin raised his hand sharply, stopping him. "You needed it more than the woman crying in the storage room because she couldn't pay her mother's hospital bills?" His voice rose slightly, echoing through the kitchen. "You think that's what this place is about?" Rick stepped back, his hands shaking. "I'm sorry. Mr. Diesel, please, I'll pay it back. I'll fix everything. Just don't." Vin's eyes narrowed. "You already had your chance," he said. His voice was calm again, but filled with power. "Pack your things and leave now." Rick looked like he might argue. But the way Vin stood, tall, steady, with that unshakable calm, told him it was useless. Slowly, he nodded and turned away, grabbing his coat from the hook near the door. The other workers watched silently as Rick walked out. His footsteps echoed down the hallway until the door slammed shut behind him. Vin looked around the room again. His voice softened. "You all work hard," he said, "and you deserve every dollar you earn if anyone has ever felt cheated or ignored. I want you to know that ends tonight." Some workers nodded quietly. A few whispered thank you, and others just smiled shyly. The fear that had hung in the air began to fade. Vin turned away and walked toward the storage room where Tasha had been earlier. He pushed the door open gently. The small bulb still hung from the ceiling, casting its weak yellow light, but the room was empty now. The crate she had sat on was still there, a small stain of tears on the floor where she had cried. Vin sighed deeply and ran a hand over his face. He felt both relieved and guilty. He had stopped the problem, but he hadn't stopped her pain. He wanted to talk to her, to tell her that things would change. He went back toward the kitchen and called out, "Where's Tasha?" A young cook answered nervously. "She went home early, sir. She wasn't feeling well." Vin nodded slowly. "All right. Thank you." He stood there for a moment thinking. The image of Tasha crying alone replayed in his mind, her voice saying, "Rich people never notice us." Those words still stung, but now he was determined to prove her wrong. He walked to the office again, opened the safe, and pulled out an envelope of cash. He counted the exact amount that had been stolen from her, and added more. Enough to make a real difference. He sealed the envelope and wrote her name on it. As he did, he whispered softly, "You deserve this and more." He left the envelope on the desk, planning to give it to her first thing in the morning, when he finally stepped outside. The night air hit his face. It was cool and calm, but his heart was still heavy. He had exposed a thief, protected his workers, and restored fairness. Yet something inside told him the story wasn't over. The truth always had layers, and sometimes the hardest part wasn't finding the lie. It was understanding what lay behind it. Vin looked back at the glowing sign of Fast Flame Grill. The fire in the logo flickered just like the one in his heart. He walked to his car, unaware that the next twist waiting for him would change everything again. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, painting the streets in a soft golden glow. Vin Diesel sat in his car outside Fast Flame Grill. He hadn't slept much. The events of last night kept replaying in his mind. Tasha's tears, Rick's lies, and the quiet shock on the workers' faces when the truth came out. He had fired Rick, yes, but the image of Tasha crying alone in that small room refused to leave him. He wanted to see her, to tell her that things had changed. He wanted her to know she wasn't invisible anymore. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the restaurant. The place looked peaceful in the morning light. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air as the early shift prepared for opening. A few workers greeted him nervously, surprised to see him again so soon. Vin smiled slightly and asked, "Is Tasha here yet?" One of the waitresses nodded. "Yes, sir. She's in the back getting ready." Vin took a deep breath and walked toward the back hallway. His heavy steps echoed softly on the tiled floor. When he reached the storage room door, the same place where she had cried last night, he paused for a second, remembering the sound of her voice. Then he knocked gently. Tasha's soft voice came from inside. "Come in." Vin opened the door slowly. The room looked brighter now, the sunlight sneaking through the small window. Tasha was sitting on a crate again, tying her apron. When she saw him, her eyes widened in shock. She quickly stood up, brushing her uniform nervously. "Mr. Diesel? I didn't know you'd be here," she said, her voice trembling a little. Vin smiled softly. "It's all right, Tasha. I just came to talk." She looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry if I said something wrong last night. I didn't know you were—" Vin raised a hand, gently stopping her. "You didn't say anything wrong," he said quietly. "You spoke your truth, and I needed to hear it." Tasha looked confused. "My truth?" He nodded. "I heard you crying last night. I didn't mean to listen, but I did, and because of that, I found out what was happening here." Her eyes widened even more. "You mean—" Vin nodded again. "Rick's gone. I checked everything. He was stealing from you and others. I made sure it ends now." For a moment, Tasha couldn't speak. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Then her eyes filled with tears again, but not the same kind of tears as before. She took a shaky breath. "You really? You fired him?" Vin smiled softly. "Yes. And I made sure you'll get every dollar he took plus a raise. You deserve that and more." Tasha covered her mouth with her hand. Her shoulders shook, but this time from relief. She let out a weak laugh between her tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Vin said kindly. "Just keep being who you are, hardworking, honest, strong. People like you are the reason this place is special." She wiped her tears, smiling through them. "Thank you, sir. I thought nobody saw me." Vin's expression softened. "I saw you, just a little too late, but not anymore." There was a silence between them, a peaceful one. Vin looked around the small room and the boxes, the crates, the dusty shelves, and thought about how many dreams started in places like this. Humble, quiet, unnoticed, he remembered his own beginnings. The days he worked at clubs and small shops before becoming famous. The long nights when he felt unseen. And now, standing here, he realized that success didn't mean much if he forgot the people who helped him build it. After a moment, Tasha took a deep breath and said softly, "I don't know how to thank you, but I'll work even harder, I promise," Vin chuckled. "Don't work harder, just work happy." "That's enough," she laughed, her smile returning. And for the first time since last night, her eyes looked alive again. Vin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This belongs to you," he said. Handing it to her, she opened it slowly and gasped. "Sir, this is too much." "It's what you earned," Vin replied, "and a little extra, for believing even when life didn't give you a reason to." Tasha's eyes glistened again, but this time her tears sparkled with hope. She held the envelope close to her chest, whispering, "You don't know what this means to me. Mr. Diesel, my mom's been sick for so long. Now I can finally pay for her medicine." Vin smiled gently. "Then that's what makes this morning worth it." He turned to leave, but before walking out, he paused at the door and looked back. "Tasha," he said, "never stop believing you matter. You're proof that good people still exist." She nodded, her smile warm and grateful. "Thank you, sir. Really." As Vin walked out into the sunlight, a wave of calm washed over him. He felt lighter, as if the weight he had carried all night had finally lifted. The morning air smelled fresh, and for the first time in a long time, he felt proud not as a star, but as a man who had done the right thing. Behind him, Tasha stood quietly, still holding the envelope. She looked around the small room that once held her tears and whispered to herself, "Maybe dreams do come true just when you least expect them." And somewhere deep inside, Vin smiled, knowing that for both of them this was not just an ending. It was a new beginning. That evening, the city lights shimmered across the wet streets after a light rain. Vin sat in his study, staring at his laptop screen. The events of the past 24 hours were all over social media. His post about Tasha and the dishonest manager had gone viral. Thousands of people were sharing it, praising him for standing up for his employees, celebrities, fans. Even reporters were talking about how humble and caring he was. But Vin wasn't celebrating. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, and his eyes stayed on one message in particular, a private email from his accountant. The subject line read, "Urgent, about the payroll issue." He clicked it open, expecting another confirmation that Rick's wrongdoing had been fixed. But what he read made his chest tighten. The accountant wrote, "Vin, I checked the transaction logs you asked for. The overtime deductions you mentioned weren't stolen for personal use. They were redirected every month to a charity foundation, registered under Rick's name. But the money wasn't going to him. It was going to help families of employees with medical needs, including one payment for Tasha's mother's hospital." Vin stared at the screen, his breath catching for a moment. The glow of the monitor lit up his worried face. His mind ran in circles trying to make sense of it. Rick, the man he had fired in anger, the man he had called a thief, hadn't taken the money for himself. He had given it away secretly. He leaned back in his chair, remembering Rick's last words, "I needed the money, my rent." Maybe Rick had been trying to say something else. Maybe he wasn't defending himself, but protecting someone. Vin rubbed his forehead, guilt washing over him. He replayed the whole night in his head, the confrontation, the tension in the kitchen, the way Rick's eyes had looked not angry but desperate. And then he remembered how quick he had been to believe the worst. His phone buzzed. A notification popped up. A news article titled, "Vin Diesel Saves Employee from Greedy Manager." His name was trending. Millions were cheering him as a hero. Yet all he felt was shame. He closed the laptop slowly and stood up, walking to the window outside. The rain had started again, light and steady. He watched the drops slide down the glass and whispered to himself, "Maybe I was the one who stopped listening." He thought of Tasha's face when he told her the truth, the way she smiled through tears believing she'd been rescued, and now he realized the man she hated, the one she thought had stolen from her, had actually been helping her mother live. Vin felt a heavy silence inside the room, a silence filled with regret and reflection. He wanted to fix it, but how? Rick was gone, humiliated in front of everyone, and the world already believed the story. No one would care to hear the truth now. He picked up his phone and typed a message to his accountant. "Find out everything about Rick's foundation, how much he donated and who it helped. I need the full truth." Then he sat back down, his mind lost between pride and guilt. He had done what looked like the right thing, but was it really right? Hours later, as night turned deep and quiet, Vin opened his journal, a leather-bound book he rarely used. He began to write in simple words, "Today, I learned something I'll never forget. The world moves fast, and sometimes we forget to look closely. I thought I was helping someone, but I might have hurt another. Rick wasn't perfect, but neither am I. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't about who's right. It's about who's willing to listen. He paused, the pen shaking slightly in his hand. Then he wrote one more line. Even heroes can be wrong when they stop hearing the truth. He closed the book, stood up and looked once more at the city lights outside. Somewhere out there, Tasha was probably home, finally smiling, probably telling her mother that things were getting better. That thought gave him a small comfort, but deep inside, he knew the real lesson wasn't about fame or kindness. It was about humility, about remembering that even when your name shines the brightest, you must still look into the shadows to see what's real. The rain outside grew stronger. Thunder rolling softly in the distance, Vin whispered quietly, as if speaking to himself and to the night. Maybe the biggest mistake isn't being wrong. It's believing you can't be. And with that, he turned off the light, leaving only the faint glow from the window behind him. The world saw him as a hero that night. But Vin Diesel knew the truth. He wasn't proud of what had happened. He was humbled, changed, and reminded of a painful but powerful truth. That sometimes the villain we fight is not another person, but our own assumptions, our own pride, our own blindness. And that lesson, more than fame, money, or success, would stay with him forever.